Hey, welcome back to Next Third, Best Third. I'm David Fenwick, your founder and the host, and today we're going to explore a subject that a lot of us don't know anything about, and it's modern psychiatry. Some of the things that tie into that are things like medications, how medications can help us. But when you find yourself in a pit, when you find yourself in real despair, where do you go? And how do you get out? And with that, I'm going to bring in my friend Bryan Walker, who's an expert in this. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, as we talk about, you and I were talking about modern psychiatry, right? Mm-hmm. And how so many of us think psychiatry and we think Freud and things like that.
Right.
Kind of bring us up to date.
Okay. So truly, most of us have this paradigm of psychiatry being, the Freudian analytic couch where you sit there and lie back and recite problems with your mother.
Yeah.
Or we think about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Jack Nicholson and the bedlam there. Truly, that's not the norm. That's not the everyday experience. Psychoanalytic is seldom used anymore. Now we've entered, since the 1970s, early 80s, an age where neuropsychopharmacology has come so far to where we know biological basis for depression, for anxiety. We know much more about bipolar illness, about schizophrenia, and many others, obsessive compulsive disorder. Mm-hmm. We've gotten to where we've been blessed with the knowledge to be able to identify how do we help these people. Sometimes it's the fact that we're helping treat symptoms. Sometimes it's the fact that we're needing to help bring correction to a metabolic issue. I'll have people ask me, well, why do I get depressed? Did they have this problem 200 years ago? Where was it in the Bible? Well, I dare say that David has a lot of lament in Psalms, and he was pretty deep. You look at Job. That man went through more trials than you can shake a stick at. Modern age, I think we need to recognize that there are so many things that are in play now that we never had in the past. 50 years ago, we didn't see the food additives. We didn't see GMO foods. We didn't see the pollution. We didn't have 24/7 newscast. The news, it's designed around the idea that I got to make tomorrow sound worse than today because that gets me viewers and that makes me money.
Right.
All these modern conveniences create their own issues. And
Right.
For us, we're not prepared to deal with that. God didn't make us to be able to handle information streaming into us and processing it all that quick.
We've talked a lot here, our 5 pillars are your thought life, your physical condition, emotional well-being, relationships, and then these identity issues, right?
Right.
That war against men and women. And one of the things that we continually come back to is how modern life is actually warring against us,
Yes.
right? We've come so far and there's so much fantastic things available to us, but like you said, food, the additives, the GMOs, the assault on our attention, the assault on our emotions just from social media and from the news, the sedentary lifestyle. We look at how diabetes and obesity is so much on the rise. But you're bringing it into a very interesting thing about the psycho, function.
Sure. Yeah, and I think one of the things that's interesting is when people talk about depression, studies show the best treatment for depression is running.
Really?
But try and get somebody that's depressed to go run. It's not going to happen.
No.
But God has given us some incredible technology. Ideally, so often we work to change our attitude, our thought patterns. We'll reach a point where we'll go see a therapist, and I know many gifted therapists that love God. But oftentimes therapy is a lot about working out the past, and that's right. That's where so much of the healing happens.
Right.
But to complement that, we also have the fact that we've got pharmacology. We've got antidepressants, anxiety medications that are allowed to help with those symptoms. Many of the individuals that I'll see, I will suggest, okay, let's start some medication. Let's give it 4 to 8 weeks. Let's get you in a place where your mood is lifted enough to where you can talk about the hard things. Mm-hmm. If you don't have the energy even to talk about those things, how do you try and process that in therapy? That's an extremely difficult thing. And yeah, you can do therapy without medication, and it works. But I've got to say, oftentimes it works much quicker with the addition of medication, to where instead of dealing with years of therapy, we may be dealing with just 6 months or so.
This is such an interesting topic to me because we're Christians,
Right.
We're believers, and on one end you see in the church a big stigma against pharmaceuticals, right?
Sure.
They think, oh, well, you just need to pray more, you just need to fast, you need to turn to God, right?
Yeah.
And get set free. And then in a lot of the people that I associate now, they're against pharmaceuticals, they're against big pharmacy, right?
Right.
And it's all holistic and everything. And I get that, right? But so here you're bringing in something, and I know a lot of our listeners are going to be like going, wait a minute, he's talking about taking drugs here.
Yeah, and I am. And medication, I think it's important to recognize that, if you go back to ancient times, pharmakia, the whole idea of medications, what we're using today are purified forms. We're taking things that God's already created, synthesizing those. Do I have an issue with big pharma? Oh, yeah. That's a whole nother topic.
Right.
But the thing is we've got research that has really been able to show us how we can directly affect your brain neurochemistry to where your mood is in a better place. I love the natural too, but I've got to tell you, when we start looking at a lot of the holistic things, I always have to run that question of, okay, so what are the side effects of this? I know what they are with medication. But what about this herb that I'm pulling out of my garden or is being shipped to me from Brazil or whatever? There's some really good ones. But in prescribing, it's always a challenge because I'm trying to make sure I'm not having an interaction between a natural product and maybe something that's been synthesized. The technology is there to where we're getting the pure product. The ability to directly target, receptors within the brain is something that's phenomenal. And we've been able to identify those and target those specifically. So it's not so much a shot in the dark. We have precise amounts, milligrams, that will dose things in a frequency based upon how their body clears it. What's safe, what protects your kidneys, what doesn't. Is it a liver problem that it'll create? A lot of the natural things are just thrown out there, and here, try this. There's a lot of good things out there, but I'm all about understanding my risk.
Right.
And I want to know what the reward is. I mean, New Testament teaches us count the cost.
Right.
I want to count the cost before I do something.
It's interesting to me too, because at least for me, and when I think about medications, and you hear an ad, right, and they tell you all the things you can do, then afterwards they just real quick tell you all the things that might be going bad, that could kill you or hurt you. And do you find that the research, especially with like when you talk about the receptors, and are they more specific and have done a research where they know exactly what the side effects are? I mean, because that's the scary thing is like,
right.
I don't know what's going to happen to me with these, if I'm taking something for my blood pressure or whatever.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, within the studies, I mean, they're pretty rigorous. And, things are not adopted just overnight. There are things that hang in research for years. I know whenever I see people, part of my discussion with them is let's talk about treatment options, and I'll go through different medications that are possibles. I'll talk to them about pros and cons, why I like something, why I don't. I'll tell them, if you see on TikTok that if you put a lime green tutu on your poodle and walk around the block, it's going to fix you. Bring the question. We shouldn't fear questions.
Right.
So bring your idea. If it's evidence-based, if we can find that there's not harm, but, if you believe it's going to help, why can't we do that along with the medication? Yeah. And for me, if you are harboring in your heart, it's like, man, if he would just do this, I'd be fine. Let's talk about it. Yeah. Let's not undermine what we're trying to do here. Let's expose it to the light and see what's there. And people always have that option of doing nothing. Whenever I discuss medications with patients, I go through with them, what the side effects are. Pharmacies are great, and they give you a sheaf of information or a QR code to look up what the side effects of things are. Lots of great information, but that's all statistics. I don't treat statistics. I treat people. And so I want to tell them, these are the common things. These are what my clients tell me they experience with this. This is what we do with it. I'll tell you about the things that are dangerous and help you know where the line in the sand is to know, wait a minute, we got to stop here. I don't want people to just let me prescribe things. I don't do that. This is a partnership. We're walking through it together, and I'm helping you with your mental health. And you need to know what you're doing. You need to be able to trust that you've got a good solid base of information. Mm-hmm. I have no problem with you saying, I need to think about this. Can I get back to you? Yeah. It's your body, it's your mind. You've got to steward that for God. I'm here to give you information and help you make wise choices. I'm not here to dictate care.
Right. The 5 pillars that we talk about with next third, best third, what I've found is they all interact, right? Mm-hmm. Your thought life and your physical life and your relationships. If you're investing in all those, you're going to have a pretty full life. It's going to be great. I know myself where I have in the past struggled with times of depression. Mm-hmm. I've never struggled really with anxiety, but I would go in that depressed mode.
Right.
Personally, for me, you brought up running. So exercising always helped me get out of it big time. And then the other thing was pouring into other people, the relationship pillar, right?
Yes.
So I'd be like, I don't want to talk to anybody, but I know I need to talk to somebody. So I'd call a friend or I'd call somebody. Next thing you know, or I'd get out of the house and I'd go and I'd meet somebody somewhere, right? So those are just some natural things you can do. But earlier you alluded to what happens when you're in a place that you can't even have the energy to run, or you can't get the energy to even go for a walk, and there are those people, right? I mean, that's very, very real.
Yeah.
And the idea that the medication, talk about that, how the medication can address that and help.
Sure. So the role of medication, to put things simply, when we go through frequently protracted stress or life events, we end up where the serotonin levels in our brain decrease. And it's like, think of it like fuel you're burning so quick. You're burning it quicker than your body can make it. The most common medication we use, the starting place almost always, is using what's called a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. SSRI.
Can you real quick talk about serotonin? Because there's going to be people who say, I've heard that, but what is that?
So serotonin is one of about 5 primary neurochemicals that help us feel and be who we are. Okay. We have serotonin, we have norepinephrine, we have dopamine, we have GABA, we have NMDA. We have all these different chemical properties that are there. Serotonin is implicated most frequently as the one that people have a deficiency of. When we use a SSRI, the way I describe it is it allows your body to begin to recycle serotonin, recycle that fuel, and raise that level back up to where you begin feeling like you again. Okay. Oftentimes it's subtle. When I have someone start on medication, I'll tell them, I don't expect to see any difference first 10 days. Day 10, you may notice something. I'm not saying you're going to feel great, but you'll notice something. By day 14, we have a pretty good idea of what that SSRI is going to do or what the medication will do. At that point, we make a decision. It's like, okay, let's give it a little more time, or let's maybe raise the dose. Not everybody's alike. And where you need 5 milligrams of something, I might need 400. Everybody's different. And it's that collaborative relationship between the individual and their healthcare provider to help make those adjustments, understand what's going on. Are you having side effects? Okay, what do we need to do about that? Is it something that's short-lived and it'll go past? Or is it something that, hey, we need to address this and change medications? It requires monitoring and due diligence to make sure the client is getting what they need to heal. Medication's a tool. It's not the answer. And right. I have lots of folks that come to me and they just want a pill. I'll treat them. But if you want to heal, we're going to combine medication with psychotherapy. We're going to have you see a therapist. We're going to have them working with you and build coping skills. We're going to be instituting lifestyle changes because you're not just a single, you're just not a single being that is chemicals. Your 5 pillars come in there. When you feel lower than a snake's belly, the idea of getting up and going out and doing something is just too momentous. I've had the individuals that spend 18 hours a day in bed. They just, we're doing good to get them to eat or drink. And goodness, I hate seeing people in that place because we've got help. When we ignore what's going on with our body and our mind and our soul, our ability to compensate is inhibited. And so we need to be able to reach out and ask for help. Your primary target is men, Men are notorious for, we gotta be tough. We're John Wayne.
Right.
Big boys don't cry. In men, we see a lot of what we call covert depression. It's not out there like everyone else. With men, we'll see anger manifested, or excuse me, not anger, but we'll see depression manifest with anger, irritability, lack of energy, decrease in sex drive, aggression. And a lot of this is you've got feelings. You've got these things popping in you, and you don't know how to process them or how to deal with them. It's not because that's who you are. That's partially chemical issue, partially the fact that we need to be dealing with therapy and processing through those emotions or those memories, because memories, those that are buried alive, stay alive.
Right. We've been talking a lot about emotions here in the last few episodes, and I've been digging deep into emotions, and I've been doing something that I call excavating. So I'll be looking at these emotions in my life and trying to analyze them, because we talk about examining your life and taking honest appraisal. So I started looking at anger. What's my relationship with anger?
Right.
Right. Those are the questions. What's my relationship with sadness? Sorrow, things like that, regret.
Right.
And it's not comfortable doing that.
No, it's not. And it's real easy to go, well, that's not God. I mean, God wouldn't have me be that way. Wait a minute. David had a lot of lament. Yeah. Saul had a lot of lament. Paul was not real thrilled when he was in prison.
Yeah.
There are these downtimes we go through, and it's not about denying, it's about processing through.
Right.
One of your guests a few episodes back talked about an emotion wheel. It's an amazing tool where it's a wheel with, from the center, it begins to define emotions. Most males only operate in just a few of those.
Right.
We don't think into the subtleties. And I know it may seem, elementary, but to even pull that up on the internet and look at that and begin to look at what you've got, because when you don't have words to express what you're feeling, an emotion wheel can help you define, what am I feeling? Because when you're able to more define it, you're able to more treat it.
That's good.
In psychiatry, people get hung up on diagnosis, and I'm not big on diagnosis. I use them because insurance companies want that information. They're useful in providing direction for treatment. They're also beneficial because as people, we don't like the unknown. We want a target. We want to, I need something to attack.
Right.
And so giving a diagnosis, it gives us a name for it and a target and a place where you can begin to formulate your attack as the individual. Where I don't like diagnosis is when people take it on as an identity. Right. You may have depression, you may be experiencing it, but you're not depressed.
Right.
You may have bipolar illness, but you're not bipolar.
No.
It's not your identity. It's something you're experiencing. When people take it on as an identity, quite frankly, that's when they become a victim. And they go, well, woe is me. I can't do anything about it. This is just who I am. And they have no motivation to pick up and try and change their current state.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought that up because, I say this. I say either we master our emotions or they master us.
Yes.
And one of the things I discovered, and I brought up anger, and I don't know if you saw this when I shared it before on a podcast, but I realized that I suppressed anger. And I suppressed it from a very young age. I was sexually abused, and I suppressed that anger.
Right.
So I would never deal with anger. I rarely exposed myself to, showed any anger, even with my kids, I just didn't do it. And just recently I realized that I thought I was in control.
Right.
I wasn't. It was controlling me.
Right.
And it was affecting my identity. And so now I'm getting to that healthy balance where I'm saying, well, even the Bible says that, in your anger, sin not.
Right.
So anger isn't the issue. There is a righteous, anger is something that it's a tool. But I looked at it as something to avoid.
Sure.
Sure.
Anger is an uncomfortable emotion.
Yeah.
Confrontation is uncomfortable. We think confrontation means conflict. No, it just means let us reason together. Let's talk through this. Let's talk about the hard thing. Let's be real.
Right.
Anger and many things, especially you mentioned, child sexual abuse and even in adults with abuse. We have things where we will take memories and we will bury them. I can't deal with this, and so we bury it. Things that we bury alive stay alive. And what eventually happens is it becomes like whack-a-mole. These things are popping up, and you're trying to get them slammed back down, and eventually they're overtaking you, and you can't keep up.
No.
And that's where you see this massive meltdown. A whole lot easier if we're able to recognize, hey, I got some stuff, I'm not sure what it is. Let me walk with somebody through that. Psychotherapy does amazing things in helping you process those things, but also do it in a controlled manner to where you're not overwhelmed, you're not overtaken. Unfortunately, sexual abuse is a constant thing that's in this world.
Yeah.
And, we're lying to ourselves if we say it doesn't happen.
No, it
It's
happens
there.
way too often. It's
Yeah.
overwhelming, really.
Oh, tremendously.
Yeah.
And, I don't know the statistics on that, but I can tell you from the people I talk to, a lot more than people think. And I've had men that were in their 50s that something occurred and all of a sudden they have this memory. It's not a false memory. It's just something they buried so deeply.
Yeah.
And with therapy, they're able to tease it out and identify what happened.
Well, that was my story. I went through the devastation that I went through in 2018, personal devastation. And through that process, I always knew something happened at age 11. I always knew. But through the process of healing and getting through what I was going through, that's when it came out. And I started going, oh my gosh. And I was so blessed that I was in a community where I had safety, where I could process with some, men that I walk with real closely. But there's so many people who don't have that. I mean, speaking of men, because isolation just dominates the American male.
Yeah. It's the John Wayne thing.
Yeah.
Big boys don't cry. I have to be tough. Thankfully, I'm just a couple years younger than you, even though I don't admit it. But my generation, those that are 40 and younger, they don't nearly have the John Wayne thing pushed on them, but still that attitude is pervasive.
Yeah.
With young boys, we're like, suck it up.
Right.
Don't cry. Big boys don't cry. We do all this, but with our daughters, we expect that. We allow them to express emotion. Yet with our sons, we tell them, hold it in, encapsulate it, bury it.
Right.
We're doing them a disservice by not letting them, experience those emotions. Emotions aren't good or bad. They just are.
They just are.
And so allowing them to express it, that's not that we let a kid just run away and have temper tantrums or whatever, but we help them express what's going on, what's hurting you. Let's help them process through that instead of telling them that they have to bury it.
So I'm sure we have listeners who and followers who this is starting to resonate with them, because in my work and in my ministry outside of this, I run across men all the time who, as I get to know them, I realize that they're really jacked up. They're in a bad spot, right? And they don't know where to go. There's stigma,
Sure.
Part of them are the ones in church, and they don't want to reveal that they're struggling with this stuff, right? And then the other part of it is this male isolation thing, and they're just in a really, really tough spot. How do we? What's next for them? I mean, because what if they're saying, man, I need to break free from this. I know something's wrong, but they don't know the depth of it, right?
Right. So, there's a number of ways to approach it. Most pastors, their heart is towards the people. They've got some basic knowledge of counseling. I don't know of a single pastor in my life that has the time to walk with somebody through these things at the depth they need to and the consistency.
Yeah.
Not because their heart's not in it. It's just the pressures of their role. Ask them for a referral. Ask them, hey, who in the body here is a therapist? Who's somebody I can talk to? Do we have a psychiatrist, somebody, a psychiatric nurse practitioner, somebody to help me through this, somebody to guide me on the path? At any one time, about 25 to 30% of a congregation is impacted by mental illness. Okay?
Say that again?
25 to 30%.
That's amazing.
And you think about it, it's not necessarily that it's the person that's sitting on the front row in the pew, but it's the fact that they're there and they've got their sister at home who has mental illness and they're trying to support them, but they don't know. The stigma keeps them from saying anything at church. Are they going to judge me because my sister has mental illness or whatever? They need that support. And that's where we see this crossover of mental illness that's just hidden. It's all covert. Until we start talking about it and acknowledging, hey, I'm struggling. how do you get help when you're drowning? Throw your arms up. Yeah, I'll help. Let them throw you a ring. But until we hear you scream, it's hard to know to throw a ring to you.
So, there's a difference between psychologist and psychiatrist, right? What you do, because you bring in the pharmaceutical. And I think in the church, at least from my point, because I've been a pastor for so long, we tend to send somebody, if we don't have some counseling, services in the church, we send them to a psychologist,
Right.
which is great. They're sitting there and they're processing through, but they're not really getting the breakthrough that you're talking about a lot of times.
Right. So difference between psychology and psychiatry, which I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner. So I'm a registered nurse with advanced training, and I'm licensed to diagnose and prescribe medications for psychiatric or mental health issues. Psychologists don't prescribe.
Right.
Psychiatrists, psychiatric nurse practitioners, we can prescribe medication. Then we have what we call licensed professional counselors or therapists. And there's varying education pathways there. They are the mainstay of mental health treatment, that ability to sit with you in a space. And sometimes it's in silence, but sit there with you and be present as you're processing to prompt you. Most of us won't ask ourselves the hard questions.
No.
That's too hard. I don't want to talk about that. Their role is to lovingly and non-judgmentally ask those questions. How are you feeling? You're not saying anything, David. What are you feeling? You kind of are looking off in the distance. Teasing that out of you to help you identify what are you feeling. So I always advocate. Therapy is amazing. What I've seen done. I've been through therapy.
Yeah.
I was sharing with my wife recently, if I had done therapy 30 years ago, how much better the last 30 years would have been, because things that have, quote, haunted me would have been dealt with. And I would have been so much freer to do other things that I feel called to. Is my life and the timeline a mistake? No. But I recognize the value of those things. And so ideally, you're going to work with a therapist and a psychiatric nurse practitioner or psychiatrist with your medication needs. Any physician can prescribe, no doubt. But most physicians that are not trained in the psychiatric field only have one or two meds that they're comfortable using. And if you have to use a combination of medications, they're really leery, and appropriately so. There's subtleties. And so that's where bringing somebody, psychiatrist, psychiatric nurse practitioner, into the picture to allow us to kind of help spend the time with you. Let's figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
As a nurse practitioner, my focus is the individual. That's how I'm trained. That's why I'm here. When I do an initial evaluation, I'll spend 2.5 hours with somebody. I want to hear their story. We're going to look at their physical health, but we're going to talk about what's going on, what's manifesting now. What are your treatment options? Most physicians, unfortunately, they're in that business because they care. But unfortunately, talk big pharma, talk big corporations. Doctors are given these metrics. You have 15 minutes to see this person in and out. They don't have time to sit down and listen to you and ask, hey, how are you doing with that?
Right.
And that's one of the things I love about what I do is I have that time. And in private practice, I control that. I can spend that time to let you share, let you wander. Sometimes I bring you back on course, but help you have that chance to share what's going on and not have you just feel like you're drive-by situation where you're just coming by the drive-by window and getting a prescription.
So in your practice, do you refer them out to a therapist, or do you work with them as a therapist also, or is it a combination?
It's a combination. A lot of times I refer them out. I have about a half dozen therapists that I refer to. Reason for that is I know all these therapists. I know their heart. I know their love for God. I know that if you come in and you say, I've been praying and I really feel like God spoke to me and said X, I know that they're not going to look at you and go, God talks to you. They're going to accept your faith for where it is, and they're going to encourage that. There's a lot of folks that I won't refer to because there is a lot of voodoo, for lack of a better word. Here, hold the crystal in your hands. It's going to make you feel better. I'm picky. I'm not going to send you to somebody that I wouldn't send my own family member to, or I wouldn't go to.
So circle back to, let's focus now on the church, people in the church.
Sure.
we seem to be okay with the therapy side, but it's the pharmaceutical side. It's the prescriptions and your expertise. That's something that is, like, say, when you and I decided we were going to do this, I was kind of wrestling around with that, going, have I ever really heard anybody from a pulpit or from a leadership really talk about this? And I never have.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah.
The only time I ever have is a dear friend of mine, same age as me. We were on staff together at church. One of the just a great guy. And he was kind of a David. He would go deep, right? He would lament, and he was a worshiper, and he was just that kind of a personality. And he struggled with depression, and he tried to do it all the spiritual ways, right? He tried to overcome it by praying more, by fasting, all this stuff. And I remember it wasn't until because he talked to me about it. He says, David, I'm going to go on medication. And he was confessing to me. Right. And I was like going, man, do what you have to do. Let's get the change in his life was remarkable.
Sure.
But yet he was struggling with that decision. I mean, I still remember when he told me, he says, I don't know what else to do.
Right. The stigma around medication is huge.
Yeah.
We feel like we're going to be judged. And, late 1988 is when we saw our first SSRI, truly the beginning of good pharmacology come out. That's when Prozac was introduced. Just about everybody's heard of Prozac. And so that was a beginning, because all of a sudden we got a way to treat depression. And so people were more open about the fact that there's treatment, so they would come forth. Then we had a wave through the 90s and early 2000s where we had people, celebrities primarily, that would come forth and they'd be real about their own mental health issues. That helped remove a lot of stigma within culture as itself. But within the church still, we have a double-mindedness of, that's the world. That's not how God does things. I got to tell you, the reason I went into what I'm doing is because when I was in my late 20s, I went through a period of depression and anxiety. Driving terrified me. I mean, I'm not talking scared me. I'm talking terrified me. My sleep was messed up. I wouldn't eat. I was dropping weight. Being with people scared me. Nothing was good. And I thought, man, if I just pray harder, if I confess my sin, if I go to my small group leader, or wait, if I fast. I did all those things. If I go through deliverance, I went through deliverance, and some change occurred. But I still was stuck, and I spent probably 7 years wrestling with this. And I wouldn't even let my insurance pay for my medication. I'd pay for it out of pocket because I didn't want anyone to know.
Wow.
It was all out of pocket because I don't want there to be a record of this. Yeah. What's somebody going to think? It wasn't until after I'd gotten married and had a couple of children that we were on vacation, and we were on a railroad where it went through the side of a mountain, and we were going to walk into the tunnel. My 2 and 3-year-old were there, and I couldn't do it. I was terrified they would fall off the edge. I was terrified to walk in the tunnel. I couldn't do it. And I couldn't be the daddy I wanted to be. And after that, that's when I finally broke down and said, I've got to find help. Yeah. Went and saw my physician. I was put on a medication, an SSRI. And I've got to tell you, I went from seeing grayscale to seeing vibrant color. I had energy. I had enthusiasm. I had joy that came back. I love spending time with my kids. I love spending time with my wife. I had the energy to take care of the basic things. Before that, it was get up, go to work, come home, veg out, go to sleep, repeat. I wasn't living, I was existing.
That's amazing.
And so, like your friend, I had to wrestle through that stigma, and it's still there. It shouldn't be. If you have high blood pressure, you don't have a problem taking medication for that. If you're diabetic, you'll take insulin. If your appendix is bursting, you'll have to go to a surgeon. That's all the same thing. It's all medication. And it's still the same body, same one that our mind is in. Yep. We tend to look and think that when we talk about our spirit, that our spirit is our brain. And it's not. A spirit, the spirit that God has made of you, the essence that He is throughout you. Scripture talks a lot about it being in the belly. Okay, I can go with that, but we know that our mind is a primary connection, our brain, with how we communicate with God and how we interact in so many ways. what's wrong with supporting the environment that organ is part of?
Yeah.
It's an organ. God made it. God made it to function in a certain way. And when the cares of this world and the pollution of social media and everything else gets you down, why aren't we looking for answers? Why are we stigmatizing it?
Right. You know, before we started recording, I brought up something to you, and a lot of my followers and listeners will identify with this. Is I try to avoid medications. I try to avoid pharmaceuticals 100%, and I always try to go the natural way.
Sure.
You know, even when we think about diabetes and high blood pressure, I'm going to change my diet. I'm going to exercise more. I'm going to do all that first
Sure.
and foremost. And I think there's a lot of people who would agree with me on that, and I think you would agree in that 100%. What we're talking about here is we're talking about, at least what I'm gleaning from this, is there comes up, for some people, there's just a time and a place where you just need help. I mean, you can't do it, you know.
If you're in that place where your mind is going to, I wish I could go to sleep and not wake up.
Yeah.
Or I wish I was dead.
Right.
When thoughts like that are creeping in, hey, we are way in the place that you need significant help.
Right.
Ideally, let's get you help before we get there. We do the natural things. We can, there's several herbs and minerals that do make an impact. Is it an appreciable difference? Is it one that can be statistically proven? Not really. There's some benefit in some of those natural products, but it's really limited. Mm-hmm. The blessing I see in pharmacology is the fact that we've got things that are proven, we've tested, we know the purity, we know what we're giving you, we know what to expect for side effects and such. We have a timeline of where we think we can, we're going to see some difference. And it's an active process. It's not just this static thing of, here, take this pill every morning. We got to converse on that.
Right.
But the place where people go and they just let it go and they can't get out of bed. The idea of going to work is just too much. God's given us 80 years approximately. God didn't make us or give us 80 years for us just to wallow and suffer.
No.
He came to give us joy.
That's right.
And when all these things are weighing on us, when all this pain from the past that's been buried is coming forth, and we may not even be seeing it come forth, we just know we're in pain, it's time to do something. Wait, God, you've got more for me than this.
That's right.
And if it's medication, fine. Let's go with somebody that will work with us, not dictate to us.
What I so appreciate about you, Bryan, is that from what I'm hearing is you're not just going to prescribe and say you're going to be on this for the rest of your life.
No.
You're trying to get them to a place where they can get healed,
right?
Where they can become whole,
right?
And then they get medicated, medication free after
right.
that, right? And that's what I think people don't understand. At least for me, I didn't really get that because I was thinking, well, it's like somebody on, on insulin.
Right.
Okay, you might need some to regulate you, but as you're working and changing your lifestyle,
mm-hmm.
you hopefully can get off that insulin.
Right.
Right.
Ideally, that's the case. When we see, so most individuals, therapy is able to make a significant difference. Mm-hmm. I frequently will talk with folks and I'll prescribe because they don't have the energy to talk about the pain. They don't even know how to look up to see daylight. Mm-hmm. Medication will help lift that mood. Ideally, in my opinion, it's medication plus therapy. Therapy is going to, once we get your mood up with medication, you're going to be able to process things in therapy. You'll be able to work through those things. Therapy is not going to just help you process those things, but they're also going to help you have coping skills so that you can function without the therapy. Mm-hmm. Help you learn different ways of handling emotions and situations. Ideally, what will happen then is therapy will back off. It'll go from once a week or once every 2 weeks to once a month, and eventually once every 3 months.
Becomes kind of a checkup.
Yeah,
a tune-up.
It's a touchstone.
Yeah.
And it's a place for you to come back and go, hey, wait a minute, this coping skill's not working that well, like we talked about. What's another way I can do this? Therapy fills that gap. And so eventually therapy stops. We've got coping skills and we've got medication. It's a three-legged stool. Mm-hmm. Okay. So we take that one leg away. I need to see if you can stand on just those coping skills. So we're going to work with that. We're going to gradually, in conjunction with how you're doing, we're going to bring down the medication dosages gradually. I don't believe in pulling the carpet out from underneath somebody. Yeah, there's times where we need to get somebody off of medication fast. True. But for most folks, we've got a little bit of time. Let's give this experience some time to solidify.
Yeah.
Your ability to succeed is huge if we continue that medication support and do a gradual withdrawal. If I pull it away suddenly and you have these coping skills that you're trying to use and you fall on your face, your resiliency, your ability to try again is really inhibited. Mm-hmm. And so I would rather gradually bring you off that. Is that going to be, can I be off this in 3 months? I have people all the time come to me and say, "Hey, okay, I'll take medication, but I got to be off this in 3 months. How can I do that?" I'm like, no, we're not going to negotiate on that. If your goal is to be off it in 3 months, you're focused on getting off the med. You're not focused on healing
and getting better, right?
So give me a year. Give me a year. Let's get the medication. Let's get you in therapy. Let's get things processing. Mm-hmm. Then let's start tapering things off.
I've got this saying. It came from a book I read when I turned 50. The book was called Younger Next Year, mm-hmm. and it resonated with me because it was setting a goal for that I'm going to change my life over the next year instead mm-hmm. of I'm going to run a marathon in 2 months, or I'm going to get, I don't do good with those kind of goals. I need longer, goals like that. And so now what I say is I'm going to be better next year. Yeah. Because really what we want, medicine is going to keep us, modern medicine is going to extend our years. We know that. We're living longer than ever. Yeah. But it's not about having more years to your life. It's more life to your years.
Amen.
That's what we want to see. That's what I want to see for you and me and all these guys and the followers. So you get to this place where the medication, for some, is needed, mm-hmm. right? And it lifts them up. It gives them that the ability to deal. And then they're going through therapy, and then they start their lifestyle changes, mm-hmm. right? And those lifestyle changes should be happening all the time too, which is what you eat, how you're controlling your thoughts, exercise, keeping relationships flourishing,
proper boundaries,
right? Setting all that kind of stuff. That all goes together. Mm-hmm. But there are those times, and I was talking to a gentleman this last week. He said that he was just in such a dark spot, and he was reaching out to me for help. And I just told him, I said, "Listen," I said, "I'm not getting in there with you, but I'll extend an arm. Yeah. I'll lower down the ladder, and you start walking up rung by rung." And I think that he's in the place, like so many, where they're just like, I just don't know where to start.
Right. And where to start is asking your pastor for, hey, who do we know that can help me with this? Is there a therapist? Asking your friends, who have you seen? Yeah. Who's been beneficial? So when they do find themselves in that pit, you're exactly right. Let me help you up. I can't crawl down the pit with you. It's like when somebody's drowning, you don't jump in the pool. That's not the first thing you do. You throw them a life ring. You work with that. And even then, if that's not it, when you encounter them, you don't come to them straight on. You come to them from behind and support them, because otherwise they're going to drown you.
Right.
Same thing in this. We need that extended hand. We need to know I'm not alone. Right. Maybe it's the fact that you need your wife or a trusted friend to go with you to a therapy session to start out. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's scary. It's different. Definitely. The people think, well, if I go in, they're gonna make me go to the hospital. They're gonna lock me in. No. The law is designed to where unless someone is a danger to themselves or others, we can't compel you into treatment. Ideally, we never put somebody in a hospital. Mm-hmm. In the 70s, we went through a whole change where mental health hospitals, asylums as they were turning people out because care needed to be community-based. And that's where we are today. That's where it should be. You don't live in a hospital. A hospital is an artificial environment that we put you in for a couple of reasons. One is it's safe. It's controlled. We know that we have limited risk for you to be able to hurt yourself or somebody else. Number two, it allows us to make medication changes on much more rapid fashion because we've got observation there. We've got people that know what's going on to be able to intervene if there's a problem. That's primarily when we hospitalize people. Ideally, it should be community-based. We flip people out of the hospital. Hospital is crisis care. We bring them out of that as quick as we can and get them back in the community because this is where you live.
Yes, right.
These are the relationships. These are the pressures. These are the things you encounter daily. Help us help you in the environment that you live. Outpatient therapy, we have things like intensive outpatient or partial hospital programs where it's like a day treatment that, for a few weeks, which great things can happen there. But ultimately, it's all in the community. And so let's build that relationship with a therapist. Let's get somebody that can help you manage your medications, make choices about medication.
Right.
I have a percentage of my patients that I never put them on medication. They
So
just need to know.
That's good to hear, right? Because I
Yeah.
think some people might misunderstand that you're not just prescribing.
No.
You're working with them, and you're getting to know them, and you're trying to figure out what's the best way to go.
Right.
And the other thing that I think is so important, Brian, is for our followers, our listeners, is to realize you got to shed light into the darkness.
Yes.
Because so many times there's people who are struggling, and they're just, like say, they're ashamed, they don't know what to do, they're scared about it. It starts with exposing. It starts with being honest and vulnerable, and that's scary.
Yeah.
But if you shed light to the darkness, it doesn't really exist. It's the absence of light.
Exactly.
Right? So by shedding light into the darkness, all of a sudden you're saying, okay, I'm struggling with this. But what a lot of people need to understand is we're all struggling at some level.
Yeah.
You and I have been doing this a long time and working with people and working with men and women, but especially men. Men all have issues.
Yeah.
I don't care who you are, you've got struggles. And that's where that John Wayne, that isolated macho man thing is so detrimental, because if you're not in community, how can you really understand that you've got stuff and I've got stuff? Hey, I've experienced that, and it normalizes it.
Well, and so let's take this a slightly different direction. Probably the most used over-the-counter treatment that men use is sex, pornography.
Yeah.
They view it because they're hurting. They want their mind distracted, but also the act of masturbating allows this release of dopamine, this hit of feel-good chemical in your brain.
Wow.
It's one of those things that sucks us in. And that's a whole nother kettle of fish that I don't want to go into today. But the thing is oftentimes we don't see the connection between our mood and our behavior. And that's one of those pieces that readily available, the church, statistics vary, but at any one time, about 60% of a church is struggling with pornography. That's male and female. I had somebody recently that I started seeing, and I asked him, hey, so where are you at with pornography? Is that an issue for you? Yeah, it is for my wife too. I was like, that kind of caught me. I was like, really? Yeah, he says, you come home, it's been a hard week, and you just want some relief, and that's just easier. And we don't have the energy for sex, but we can, use pornography, and that we can feel better from that.
Wow.
And that's not a judgment statement. That's saying that our cups are too full. We're not prioritizing things the way we should. And the very act that God created, a one flesh union that should be healing, is being circumvented because of the enemy.
Yeah.
We're using a counterfeit way to meet a legitimate need. We know that when we touch, when we hug, there's chemicals that are released, and you feel better. When was the last time that, you hugged your kid and held them for 2 minutes, or your spouse, just held them? There was no agenda. You just held them. They knew that you were there. They felt your breath. They knew your loving arms. It makes a difference.
Makes a huge difference. You know me, I'm a hugger.
Yep. Definitely.
I'm the club hugger, go around. But I have experienced that. Just the other day, there was a young man who came to me, and he was struggling. And I was talking to him, and I'm not qualified to be a counselor, so I don't try to counsel. I just try to listen. And all of a sudden it hit me. I said, he just needs a hug. And I hugged him, and he just broke down weeping in my arms. And I held him for probably 2 minutes, and my shirt got all wet and all that kind of stuff. But what was happening there in that exchange was so healing for him, you know, and it was so good. And we'll be ending here in just a second, but when you said that about pornography as a medication, so we could either go and have someone like you who really helps us and works with us with a plan, or we could self-medicate with alcohol, drugs, porn, whatever it may be, but you're medicating some way.
Yeah. And I'm sorry I'm extending us here for a second. We have this view in our society, and it's pretty pervasive, that marijuana is safe. We are seeing more and more studies that show that, you may get some anxiety relief on the front side, but there's a rebound anxiety that occurs on the backside.
Really?
There's a study conducted of males starting at about age 10. They followed this group up through about the age of 23. How you decided which arm of the study they went into was whether they used drugs. Age 10, nobody's using anything. Each year, as it went by, they would separate them into the different arms of the study. What they found was that the individuals that were using marijuana had a higher incidence of bipolar illness and schizophrenia than the arm that didn't, even compared to just society as a whole. What we think is a safe drug isn't. It's affecting your brain.
Yeah.
And you can say, well, my parents did it. Well, okay, maybe they did. And that was 30 years ago when it was maybe 3% THC. There's products that are out there that are like 37% THC. You know, I've had patients that single use of marijuana have gone psychotic and had psychosis for over 6 months. Single use. And I got to tell you, I've had folks come in, I'd have a drug screen on them, and I'd be talking to them, and I'd say, so what all did you use? Marijuana, that's all. Really? Oh, yeah. I'm scared of that other stuff. Drug screen shows 3 other drugs in your system. I didn't take them.
It was laced in the marijuana?
You're right. I don't think you knew you did. But that guy that just sold you that product, he didn't care about your health. He wants a profit. There is no sterility. There's no cleanliness. There's no purity. They're just going to sell whatever they can.
Yeah.
And so don't trust what you're given. Is it going to be fentanyl next time?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, this has been enlightening, really. This is, you've just opened up a whole thing to me that I have, and I'm sure some of my listeners are going, man, I got to process this, but
Yeah.
It's so important, and I so appreciate your heart and your attitude and what you're doing and bringing this information to all of us here. So,
well, thanks for having me. I mean, I feel called to the church. I'm, if you want to say it, I market myself to the church. My website, the sources that send referrals to me, they know I'm a believer. Mm-hmm. And those are the folks that I want to treat. I want to engage you with your faith. Do I have folks that have gender dysphoria, that are struggling, that body dysmorphia? I see it all.
yeah.
But God loves them. And my job's not to sit here and give you the 4 spiritual laws. About 6 months ago, God brought a passage out of Romans to me. And it says that it's the kindness, the goodness of God that draws men to repentance.
Yeah.
I don't have to say anything. I just got to love them.
That's right.
He's going to bring them. That's his job.
Yeah.
My job's to love them.
And you love them well.
Thank you.
You love them well. So we're going to put Bryan's information, his website, down in the links below. But if you do me a favor, and if you would click like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, but comment and share, because this kind of information is critical if we're truly going to make the next third our best third. See you next time.